This is a CFCN special presentation.
Wollen wir ringen und wollen wir kämpfen und niemals erlahmen und niemals ermüden und niemals verzagen und niemals verzweifeln. Es lebe unsere Bewegung, es lebe unser deutsches Volk.
The Nazi agenda was set, and the massive military machine of the Third Reich began flexing its muscle.
Gradually we became aware of the rise of Nazism, the rise of fascism in Italy, and then of course the headlines. Living in a big city, radio, lots of newspapers, you became very, very much informed.
Hitler was on the march into Austria, the Sudetenland, Czechoslovakia, and then into Poland. The die was cast. Germany had plunged the world into another war.
I'll never forget that Sunday, standing in our dining room, 11 o'clock. This is London, the Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain.
This country is at war with Germany.
I think it was the last justified war, if you could never use that word in terms of war. I mean, here was a cancer of cruelty creeping across Europe that had to be stopped at terrible sacrifice.
Canadian soldiers rushed to Britain's aid. Thousands of boys, still in their teens, boarded ships and crossed the Atlantic. In between the training and waiting for the action to begin, soldiers met the local girls who would one day become their wives.
We go skating Saturday afternoon, and that's where I met my destiny.
Almost 50,000 other young women would share a similar destiny. They would fall in love and marry men they hardly even knew. And then they'd leave home and family behind to make a new life in Canada. They were called the Brides of War. And this is their story.
London was burning. Soon other great British cities would fall victim to Nazi terror bombing. Night after night the planes came over, raining death and destruction. But the attacks only strengthened British resolve.
We know that out of this time of trial and tribulation will be born a new freedom and glory for all.
I had my little girl. She was born there. She was 4. She's here today. And and I used to take her to work with me. And when the planes came right over, I used to have to drop on the ground and cover her.
I was in Kent most of the time. And of course, that actually was Buzz Bomb Alley. You know, I mean, the war was there. You know. The planes were coming, the guns were firing, the sirens were going, but we went to the dances and the band played loud. We went to the movies and it would come up on the screen as an air raid, so, oh well, it's just an air raid. And we just carried on. You know.
It was business as usual. I love the story of the shop front bombed out, glass all over the place. And the storekeeper puts up a sign, open as usual, wide open. And if there was a raid, you ran for the Anderson shelter. And the funny thing is, Bill, you had one pair of silk stockings. This was your treasure. You loved it so much. And you'd be running and they'd be dropping the bombs. And you weren't scared about getting blown apart. What you were scared about was you'd get a run in your stockings. Life went on as usual. It got interrupted by tragedy. It got interrupted by raids. But it was amazing how it went on.
For women, life included conscription into the forces and jobs in the factories, which turned out the instruments of death everyone hoped would help win the war.
I'm the girl that makes the thing that drills, the hole that holds, the spring that drives, the rod that turns, the knob that works, the thingamabob.
At shift's end, women flooded out of the factories and shops for a well-earned break from the war. They filled the picture shows, pubs, and dance halls, and many met the servicemen they would marry.
Who's taking you home tonight after the dance is through?
Most of the girls met their husbands at the parley dancing. Ballroom dancing, that's where we met. And all the cities had the big dance halls, the big time bands.
Well, there were lots of guys, and I met my husband. He asked me to dance.
I worked in a casualty ward, and the nurses and other staff, they had dances, and they invited the soldiers from that district, and then I used to be a wallflower, and he came over and gave me a dance.
Oh, you won't believe this. I met him in Woolworths. He said he was looking for souvenirs to take back to Canada, so I guess he always says he got one. He got two, really.
I was walking down the street with a bunch of my friends, and he came out, and a bunch of Air Force fellas came along, and they were asking us, "Where you going, girls?" And my husband at that time said, "Didn't your mother ever tell you to speak to strange men?" And that's how we met.
Well, I met my husband on Christmas Day 1941, and as many families did in Europe and in Britain, we sent an invitation out to entertain soldiers at Christmas and holidays and Sundays, and we had two Canadians come, and he was one of them.
The waitress said to me, "Well, there's no other place but you have to sit beside this Canadian soldier." And I said, "Are you sure? There's no other place?" "No way." So I sat down, looking out the window, and he was there. And I could see him, kind of sideways looking, And then my foot dropped, how you got your feet. So that was the story. That started it. And he always says I kicked him to get him.
Wedding bells rang out. Competing with the air raid sirens, the war raged on, separating newlyweds for long periods of time.
It was romantic. 1941, You're 16, you're in love. Even though the bombs are falling, it keeps you going.
For some women in the occupied countries, the war years were a living hell.
Hilversum was a kind of a garrison town, and we had all the Germans too. That was the worst thing when the first German uniform that we saw on our street.
The people felt the scourge of the swastika and saw firsthand the hidden agenda of Hitler's Third Reich.
They started to take the Jews out of the country. And one factory in Holland went on strike as protest. They took a few people out of the workforce, shot them, finish the strike.
I was for 8 months in jail. Then they transported me to a work camp. I was in a work camp, that got bombed. I got to the next camp, and the next camp. And finally ended up in Buchenwald.
Buchenwald, Bergen-Belsen, nightmares of horror, Nazi labor camps of death.
You make them work and then you just drop dead. And I have seen him hanging too.
You thought you'd never come up?
No, I thought we'd never come up. So that's the American scheme.
The Americans liberated the camp at the end of the war, and emotionally and physically scarred Ann Hawkins was free.
Today is Victory in Europe Day.
Victory. For Canadian soldiers, it meant coming home. But 50,000 of them wouldn't be coming home alone. Their war brides and children were going too.
It was rather hilarious and very sad, because here are all these war brides coming aboard this train. And here is there are pipes there, and they're playing "Will You No Come Back Again?" and everybody is weeping.
We didn't know where we were going to or what we were going to. I mean, we didn't know our husbands actually that well. We just met.
They boarded ships, the Empress of Scotland, the Aquitania, the Queen Elizabeth, and the Queen Mary.
We anchored outside Halifax during the night, and when we woke, there was Halifax. And here I am with Johnny in my arms, and I'm waltzing around this deck of the Queen Mary to, oh, what a beautiful morning. It was glorious. And then this soldier came and he took the baby, and this other soldier came, and I'm waltzing with him. And that was my welcome to Canada.
Special bride trains were waiting to take the arrivals to their new homes. Women had already been trained in England to prepare them for life in Canada. They saw the latest fashions Canadian women were wearing. But nothing could have prepared them for the endless trip across vast stretches of bleak, flat land. More than one bride wondered exactly what she'd gotten herself into.
My gosh, going that long train ride from Halifax all the way to Regina. And my husband picked me up in Regina. And then, oh my gosh, when I got out of Regina, flat as the back of your hand, not a tree in sight, and I got lower and lower and lower on the car.
And I thought, how marvelous, I'm seeing it, until we hit Saskatchewan. Oh my God. And there was this bleak landscape with these abandoned farmhouses rising up like gravestones. And I thought, what a country.
It wasn't too bad until we got into the mountains, and I thought, oh, I'm at the end of the world, you know, what have I done? You know, really.
I can always remember when I came off the train, it was so cool and crisp, beautiful day. And I thought, well, here we go, and it's been wonderful.
War bride trains pulled into little stations like this one all across the country. And when the trains came to a stop, the women looked out the windows trying to catch a glimpse of the departing bride and her Canadian husband. Most got warm welcomes, but in some cases, the welcome was quite a shock.
We were supposed to transfer in Calgary and go on to Wetaskiwin on a different line. And there was one lady with me, she had one baby in arms and a little child, and she was going to Hobbema. Now, at the time, this didn't mean anything to her or I. And when we got to Hobbema station, the ticket man said, you have to get off here to this lady. And we, as we looked out the window, we saw a tribe of Indians dressed up in their Indian finery. Of course, we didn't have a clue. And she said, I wonder who they are. So when she got off, I watched, and this were the people that were coming to meet her. She didn't know that she had married an Indian from the Hobbema Reserve.
They came into families that might not have welcomed them. They came into families who absolutely adored them. They came into families where there were language barriers. There were so many things that had to be adapted to. And I'm looking at all these war brides being greeted. And suddenly, something, somebody, someone grabs me and kisses me. I don't know who. But when we unpucker, and I looked at him, I thought, this is my husband. I'd never seen him in cities, you know? And I thought, my God, am I supposed to love you for the next 50 years? This stranger?
The romantic fantasies of life in Canada created by lonely soldiers was soon shattered by cruel reality. This is Nightingale. A dot on the map near Strathmore, Alberta. Doreen Christopherson arrived here from London in 1946 after a trip from Calgary over gravel roads in an old truck.
Well, I was in the state of shock. It was December 1946 that I arrived here, and this was the only store that was here. There was nothing else. Honestly, I don't know whether I'd be able to stand now to be able to come out to something like this. Looking back, I just wondered how, you know, how I did survive, but I did. I spent my first evening actually in this old house when I came to Nightingale. Of course, the house is dilapidated now, but it brings back a lot of memories going inside it. This used to be this was the kitchen, and we used to have an old coal stove in here. And this is another room that was kind of a living room, and this is where we spent our first Christmas actually in this house. We had the Christmas tree, but there was only decorations on it, no lights or anything, because we never had lights in here. It used to be just gas. If I, you know, had known what I was coming to, I really don't know whether I would have come out here. But I've no regrets coming to Canada, not now.
Of the 50,000 brides who came to Canada after the war, only about 10% packed it in and went home to Europe. The rest stuck it out, became Canadians, raised families, and blended into the country's cultural mosaic.
Here we are again, glad to be around, meeting all the war brides from every blinking town.
These are the war brides today. Their families have grown, and many feel the need to recapture the old days. For the past few years, there have been reunions. There is a common bond and a need to get together to renew old friendships, reminisce, and enjoy a nostalgic weekend, not only for themselves, but for their husbands as well.
I got a letter from a widow, and she said to me, you know, Gloria, when you're left alone, you lose your partner. A lot of doors that were open when there was two of you are now closed. Now, she said, I think it would be a good thing. She said, if there was a club of war brides or something, would you start one? It was just a thing like this.
Of course, being a widow, it's a little sad, but you think we had a good life, we had a lot of good memories. And something like this that you've got, you know, you're all together and you've got so much support that it's marvelous.
Canadian, these people, you know. They're not just from Britain, they're from 16 countries. And there was 48,721 war brides. They married into every group that makes up Canada, you see. So they're not just British and Scottish and so on. And I would like people to know this.
To me, it was the happiest day of my life when I met my husband and married him. Mind you, I have a little story behind it. On our third date, he said, one of these days I'm going to marry you. And I said, don't be daft. You know, I'd only just met the man.
He followed us home one night and made a date just to get rid of them. But for some reason or other, I felt guilty, and I went to where we had arranged to meet them. And I didn't see him that night, but I told him that I didn't really have any intentions of coming, but I made a date for another night, and that's when I was 16.
When you look at these old wedding pictures taken in 1945, a few lines of verse come to mind. If there were dreams to sell and the crier rang his bell, what would you buy? I think they all had a dream, certainly optimism and faith in the future. What did they buy? For a few, perhaps, heartbreak and disillusionment. But for most, a fair share of happiness and contentment.
I'm Anne Gawley, and I'm a war bride and an ex-Air Force gal, and I'm from Bonnie, Scotland.
I'm Margaret Blaine. I came from Skegness, Lincolnshire. I was in the HS for 6 years, and I now live in Bonneville.
Hi, I'm Jenny Erdley. I'm from Winnipeg, originally Dagenham, Essex.
My name's Sally Davies. I come from London, England, from the Old Kent Road.
I'm Anne Fendel Zarnacki, and I'm from Kirkcaldy, a smaller town near Edinburgh.
Margaret Kewen from Glasgow, Scotland.
Oh, hi, I'm Brenda Germain, and I come from Colchester in Essex, and I arrived in Calgary in 1946.
My name's Elizabeth Orlando. I met my husband when we were both 19 years old, but he was to come up to Scotland to marry me, but the army had other ideas.
I'm Audrey Russell. I'm from London, England, and I met my husband, married him when I was 18, and came to Blairmore.